Today I'm going to talk about the top 10 weirdest CTA bus routes. The criteria for this isn't going to be super strict. I'm going to look at any abnormalities, whether they have to do with the route's schedule, routing, or even more specific operation stuff. Pretty much anything transit bus routes don't normally do. These aren't necessarily bad routes by any means. Most of the time, the weirdness of these routes have very good reasoning behind them. I also won't be counting routes that only run for sporting events like the 19 or 128, as I don't consider them to be legitimate routes that run regular service. So without further ado, let's get started. Route number 10 is, well, the 10. The 10 runs from the Museum of Science and Industry to the Water Tower. So this route is one of the three whose primary purpose is to serve major recreational destinations, with the other two being the 124 and 130, serving Navy Pier and Museum Campus respectively. The 10 is the weirdest of the three routes for a couple of reasons. Firstly, the bus only runs during the summer, which the CTA considers to be between Memorial Day and Labor Day. The 130 also does this. The weirder thing though is that the bus does not serve Ogilvie or Union Station, which is a stark difference from the 124 and 130 whose major purposes are to bring suburbanites from Metra to tourist destinations. Number 9 is the 125 Water Tower Express. The route runs from the Water Tower, of course, and heads along Michigan through River North, then ends just beyond Union Station. It runs bidirectionally during rush hours only. On the surface, the 125 seems like a regular shuttle route between the metro stations and other parts of downtown. However, the route runs in a very weird way. During the morning rush, northbound buses are articulated buses returning north to restart their run on the 134, which is a single-direction lakefront express route. Southbound buses, on the other hand, are regular 40-foot buses, sourced from elsewhere. In my experience, there's no significant ridership difference in direction justifying the use of 60-foot buses in one direction but 40-foot ones in the other. This difference simply exists because the 134 uses 60-foot buses. So route number 8 is the 111A, Pullman Shuttle. The 111A runs from Cottage Grove and 115th to 103rd Garage, serving East 111th as well as the Pullman Community Center before ultimately arriving at 103rd Street Garage. The main purpose of this route seems to be to serve destinations in East Pullman that the 111 or 115 can't serve without taking a ridiculously circuitous route back to 95th. Transit on the far south side in general is weird due to the lack of L service south on 95th, meaning many east-west buses have to take silly routes to serve the L. The 111A is a symptom of this situation, filling some of the gaps created by every other route in the area needing to serve 95th Red Line. Route number 7 is the 2. The 2, which has the name Hyde Park Express, runs rush hours only from Navy Pier through downtown, then goes express to Hyde Park, where it ends at 60th and Cottage Grove. The weirdest part of this route is its routing through Hyde Park. During morning rush hour, the bus exits Lakeshore Drive at 57th, then heads to 60th Street, where it continues until Cottage Grove. The bus takes a little break, then continues up Cottage Grove until East Hyde Park, where it then goes east to Lake Park and gets back on Lakeshore Drive at 47th, ultimately running like two separate routes. During evening rush hour, the route takes this loop in the other direction. The purpose of this setup is to bring people from downtown to the University of Chicago while simultaneously providing an extra express route from Hyde Park, as it's one of the South Side's denser neighborhoods. This is much more easily accomplished with the loop rather than two separate routes. Number 6 is the 5, South Shore Night Bus. As evident by the name, the bus only runs during the night, from about midnight to 5 a.m. The reason this route exists is to provide service on the sections of several routes that have the highest overnight demand. The route begins at 69th Red Line and runs through South Shore and South Chicago entirely along sections of these routes before continuing along the 95's routing back to 95th Red Line. Number 5 is the 192. The 192, called University of Chicago Hospitals Express, runs peak direction rush hour express between downtown and the University of Chicago. The bus takes a very abnormal routing. During AM rush hour, it starts from Ogilvie Station, stops at Union Station, then runs its express to Roosevelt Red Line, where it then gets on Lakeshore Drive until 53rd, stopping at 53rd and Lake Park, then continues without stopping until 59th and Kimbark, where it then runs locally until 57th and Cottage Grove. This seems pretty normal for a route that exists exclusively to serve the University of Chicago, but the PM rush hour routing is where it gets weird. First of all, the bus only starts at 59th and Drexel, so most of the route on 59th runs only during the morning. From Drexel, the bus heads up Cottage Grove to 55th, then heads over to Indiana where it continues until Roosevelt, slipping over to Michigan at 31st. There are no stops between 57th and Cottage Grove and Roosevelt Red Line. I have no idea why the route does this, as opposed to running on the Dan Ryan or running up Cottage Grove to Lakeshore Drive at Oakwood. Route number 4 is the 26 South Shore Express. The 26 starts at Chicago and Fairbanks and heads through downtown on Michigan before getting on Lakeshore Drive at Roosevelt, where it runs express to 67th. The route then continues through the South Shore, South Chicago, and East Side neighborhoods, ultimately ending at 103rd Street Garage and running entirely along sections of these routes. The thing that makes this route so weird is its schedule. The route runs weekdays in peak direction, but runs all day as opposed to exclusively during rush hour. The first northbound bus leaves 103rd Garage at 4:15 a.m., and the last one leaves at 1:45 p.m., whereas the first southbound bus leaves Michigan and Superior at 1:15 p.m., and the last one leaves at 9:24 p.m. In addition to running through midday, the route runs a lot earlier and later than most rush hour-only routes, and even some 7-day-a-week routes. There is likely some logic behind this schedule. The CTA must have determined that many South Shore residents had jobs downtown that began sometime in the morning and ended sometime in the afternoon or evening hours, even if they weren't typical 9-to-5 jobs. Number 3 is the 206. The 206, named Evanston Circulator, circulates around Evanston, obviously. The 206 sort of tries to be a 3-in-1 route. The route runs during rush hours only, starting at Howard Red Line, where it heads west until Ridge. During AM rush hour, buses head north on Ridge until Lake, where they then turn and go to Dodge, taking Dodge to Simpson, Simpson to Ashland, Ashland to Green Bay, and then Green Bay up to Central, where they continue west until Crawford. Southbound buses take Dodge all the way to Oakton, where they then head to Asbury and ultimately back down to Howard. During PM rush hour, this loop is reversed, with northbound buses going via Asbury and Oakton and southbound buses going via Ridge. In addition to this, one southbound run heads east on Church, then turns south on Chicago, continuing all the way back to Howard Red Line. The 206 also has some other weird aspects, like there are only 3 northbound AM runs, but 7 northbound ones, and many more runs during PM rush hour. This route essentially exists as a school bus, getting 3 times the ridership from September to May than it does during the summer. It primarily serves students at Evanston Township High School, but also other schools in the area. Route number 2 is the 165 West 65th. The 165 starts at Midway, heads south on Cicero to 65th, then heads west on 65th to Old Harlem where it terminates. This route runs during rush hours only in the anti-peak direction, so westbound in the morning and eastbound in the evening, which are not the directions one would expect most people are going. This route exists to both serve warehouses and factories on the south side of 65th, and so that extra 63W buses going in the direction most residents of the surrounding area are going can get back and restart their route faster than simply returning along their normal route on 63rd. The 165 is about 5 minutes faster going from Midway to Harlem, as 65th is much more conducive to higher speeds than 63rd. Ridership on this route is obviously extremely low, with only about 200 boardings per day, though ridership has risen dramatically since 2017, and daily boardings are currently higher than pre-COVID. Before I get to number 1, I want to talk about some honorable mentions. So these aren't going to be routes that are kind of weird, but just not weird enough to be in the top 10. Instead, I'm going to talk about some very weird discontinued routes. So essentially, routes that turned out to be too weird. So first is the X98, which was just continued in March of last year. The X98, called the Avon Express, ran 1 run per day at about 12:45 a.m. The route started at the Avon facility at Gulf and Waukegan, the route's only stop. It then headed east on Gulf until Harms, where it turned south and got on the Edens Expressway at Dempster. It then continued to Jefferson Park Blue Line, running via Cicero, Foster, and Milwaukee after getting off the Edens Expressway. The route was sponsored by Avon, a cosmetics company, and existed for the sole purpose of transporting their workers from one of their facilities to the rest of the CTA system. In March of last year, Avon stopped sponsoring the route, so it was discontinued. Next is the 33 Magnificent Mile Express. The 33 was a very interesting route. It started at Western Metro Station on the Milwaukee District West and North Central service lines, then headed east on Grand until Orleans, where it went up to Ohio heading east to Michigan. Westbound buses went via Ontario and Wells. The route then headed up Michigan until Oak, where it got on Lakeshore Drive. It then headed west on North Avenue until Elston, continuing north on Elston to Clybourne Metro Station, where it ended, stopping only at L and Metro stations outside of the section on Michigan Avenue where it made all stops. This bus ran during AM rush hour only, not even evening rush, only morning rush. I have no idea why this was. It seems the purpose of this route was to connect metro stations with the Magnificent Mile, hence the name. The route did this in a silly way though, as it served auxiliary stations just outside of downtown, making the journey on the bus much longer than necessary. The third honorable mention is the 173, which may just be one of the weirdest routes to have ever existed in the CTA. The 173, called University of Chicago Lakeview Express, ran during evening rush hour only. Starting at the University of Chicago, it ran through Hyde Park until 47th and Lake Park, where it got on Lakeshore Drive and ran express to Roosevelt, where it then went up Columbus to Balboa, then west over to Michigan, where it continued north to Ontario. It then turned west and headed to LaSalle, turning north and taking LaSalle to North Avenue, where it then went over to Halstead, turned north and continued until Belmont, where it ended. Southbound buses took Belmont east to Lakeshore Drive, where they ran express until Ontario, and headed west to Michigan, where they then followed the northbound routing back to Hyde Park. The route was created in 2000 and discontinued in 2009, though southbound service was discontinued in 2006. Beyond being a University of Chicago route that serves Lakeview, which is a neighborhood far from the university with no buildings owned by the institution, the bus took an unexpected and frankly dumb routing. Since the bus gets off Lakeshore Drive at Roosevelt and goes up Michigan, it avoids any speed advantages that a route would have if it bypassed downtown on Lakeshore Drive, essentially making it just another 6 or 28. The routing along Ontario, LaSalle, North Avenue, and Halsted is also quite unusual. I have no idea what the reasoning behind this choice was, nor whether it was intelligent reasoning or not. For number 1, the weirdest route in the CTA today, we have the 169 UPS Express. The 169 runs from the UPS facility in Willow Springs to 69th Red Line, going via Willow Springs Road, Archer, 79th, Halsted, and 69th. The route runs express from the UPS facility to Cicero, at which point it stops about every 8 blocks until arriving at 69th Red Line. Since the route's entire purpose is to serve workers at UPS, the route only runs trips after shift changes, with 5 daily round trips from 69th Red Line to UPS and back, departing the Red Line at these times and arriving back at these times. So I don't know why the bus goes up to 69th Red Line as opposed to heading directly to 79th. The fact that 69th has a better bus terminal would make sense if the bus didn't just go out of service and head off somewhere else after terminating.